and welcome to the Psyched podcast. I'm your host, Kaya Roman, and today I am so psyched to have Natalie Ginsberg from MAPS joining me. You guys, this woman is so incredible. I'm going to tell you about her. I'm such a fan, and by the time you hear her story, I know you will be too. So Natalie, even though you're going to wonder how is this possible, she joined MAPS in 2014 when she was 5. um,
25, actually.
you don't age. She founded the Policy and Advocacy Department and served as its director for 5 years. She also initiated and co-developed MAP's Health Equity Program, which we're going to hear about. And today, as Global Impact Officer, Natalie works for the responsible integration of psychedelics into mainstream culture to help set the setting for an ethical global movement. Before joining MAPS, Natalie worked as a policy fellow at the Drug Policy Alliance, where she helped legalize medical cannabis in her home state of New York and worked to end New York's race-based marijuana arrests. Natalie currently lives in Los Angeles. She received her BA in history from Yale and her master's of social work from Columbia. She is also a co-founder of the Jewish Psychedelic Summit. See what I mean, you guys? This lady is such a badass. So Natalie, I just want to talk about your journey a little bit. So, history at Yale, master's in social work at Columbia. You helped legalize cannabis in New York, stopped saw that there was a real need to stop race-based arrests, started the Jewish psychedelic movement, and then had the foresight to join MAPS like almost 9 years ago. What inspires you? It's like you're on the cutting edge. You're obviously driven by some kind of personal mission. I would like to know, what's the inside story there? Do you have some personal experience? What is driving you, woman? Because you are epic.
So I'll just thank you so much. It means so much coming from such an epic woman. And one of the most important things to me is community building and organizing. So seeing the work that you've done among women is really inspiring to me. So really all of your compliments just mean that much more coming from you. So really. And yeah, I guess it has been a bit of a journey. First, I'll say, like, you asked about my personal experiences. And
yeah.
I hadn't even tried psychedelics besides weed before starting at MAPS. I actually had tried once or twice and not felt anything. So it wasn't from a personal psychedelic experience per se. Although cannabis definitely helped me understand what psychedelics were. Cannabis is a type of psychedelic. And so I don't see that as separate. But honestly, my whole life, I had been drawn to issues around racial justice and equity. I do believe that's in no small part due to being a Jewish person. And when I was young, like when I was literally 7 years old, I went through this phase of reading like only books about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
My favorite book was When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit. But I do think they kind of gave me some lens into what is possible in a society. I grew up in New York City. And, Berlin at the time actually felt kind of comparable to what I was reading about. And I was like, wow, this can happen there. What's happening here? And when I looked around in the US, what was most striking to me was how racist our society was, and our systems of mass incarceration seemed to be one of the most concrete ways that we were implementing racism, basically. So that was really a big driver for me. And, I was motivated, studying history. I was just always interested in understanding the world more generally and what happened, because I really believe history helps inform our future, whether or not we know about it. So it's more useful to know about it, I believe. And I got drawn to social work school. Well, I'm trying to shorten the story. Of course, there's a lot more to that. But at social work school, I worked with people arrested for prostitution at an alternative sentencing court. And I also worked at a middle school in the South Bronx as a guidance counselor. So,
oh man, you saw some intense stuff.
Very, very intense, really highly traumatized populations. And I was honestly, it was a deep honor to be able to do that work. And I learned a lot. And two of the kind of main things that really helped me make my next moves were, one, that I was so frustrated with our approaches to mental health being so focused on the symptoms. And I just felt like it wasn't really helping stuff. And we're like, okay, let's help this person sleep better. I'm like, they are experiencing so many issues, like,
right.
Not to diminish helping with something like sleep, which can be massively important, but it's just like, this isn't like, our approach is not getting to like the root source of things. And then I was seeing that actually the root source of so many of people's trauma, what I understood was that it was systemic issues. It was racism. It was really fucked up, excuse my French, policies, that was what was causing all this trauma. So that motivated me to look at what were some of these policies that were causing so much harm. Especially I did some calculations. As you mentioned, I was really privileged. I went to Yale and Columbia. I grew up in New York City and went to a private school there. And my experience made me realize, like, what, with my context, what could I best do? Like, how could I leverage my contacts, my knowledge to help the folks that I was working with in a way that felt more impactful. And that really did get me thinking about like policy reform. And, as I mentioned, I kind of saw mass incarceration as a big source of that. And then as I was looking at mass incarceration, I saw drug policy was actually like the main driver of mass incarceration, and was so disproportionately administered. I was at social work school and heard the now current executive director of DPA, Drug Policy Alliance, Cassandra Frederick, an incredible woman. She also went to Columbia Social Work School and was giving a talk during lunch about the marijuana arrests. And that just really captured my attention. At the time, this was like 2013, I guess. It wasn't really a thing like it is now.
Right.
The Alliance did an amazing job of raising massive awareness of the racial disparities in arrests, but at the time that wasn't like known. So something just really like piqued my, I was like, okay, this like resonates. It seems like kind of a combination of a lot of things. And so I got drawn to working at Drug Policy Alliance. It was also during social work school as a policy fellow. And as you mentioned, I got put on the team that worked to legalize medical cannabis, which was really exciting. And we also did a lot around decriminalization. And honestly, at the time, I really fell in love with drug policy reform. And I really saw it as something that hit on so many aspects of our culture and society, and something that was just really not understood as well back then. And also something that once people knew more of the facts and the research, they actually changed their mind about. Like in college, I had done a lot of work around reproductive justice, which, I still care deeply for pro-choice work, but it felt like there was this like limit. Like if people thought,
there's no amount of science that will change people's minds on certain issues.
Yeah. And drug policy was like, literally, you just don't know the science. You're uninformed. Like, let us break this down. And that I think was one of the motivating pieces. So I was at Drug Policy Alliance and then started reading about MAPS's research, and something just clicked. Even though I hadn't tried psychedelics, I was like, what is this that in 3 sessions someone can be healed? We don't use that terminology.
Right.
Like someone's healed from like addiction or from PTSD. And at social work school, we're being learned, if you're diagnosed with addiction, you have it the rest of your life.
Yeah. And there's no cure for PTSD, and you're working with these highly traumatized populations. So I'm sure that piqued your interest.
It absolutely did. And it also really helped me see like, this must be actually getting to the root source of things. If in 3 sessions it can move something in a way that we're saying doesn't ever move, it must be really doing what I was like seeking, like getting underneath. And so that really drew me, because both on the interpersonal level it was getting to the root cause, but then on a systemic policy level it was also really asking for a major paradigm shift in how we approach both criminal justice, but also how we approach mental health, how we approch medicine, how we approach, there's just so many huge areas that I saw this really helping us examine. I got just really compelled and to MAPS and they were like, oh, we'll like take an intern. I'm like, no.
Right. I mean, this was 2014. This was before they had all their big funding, right?
Tiny. We were 14 people at the time. And Rick luckily was like, oh, you work on policy. Yeah, I can use some help on marijuana policy. And actually I need some help on the therapist training. And so he kind of hired me to like work on a few different things.
Right. I'm sure.
Yeah, after like a year or so, I saw the need to actually found the policy team and saw that no one else was actually talking about psychedelic policy reform except Rick, excuse me. And so, yeah, from there, that's kind of how it grew, and always a key part of policy reform for me, and hopefully for most people, is around equity and access. So that was always really front of mind for me, getting to MAPS and seeing how white it was and how much of our research were white therapists and study participants. And ask questions. I was told like, that's just who's like showing up. And, you know, I believe there's reasons for everything.
Right. Why is that?
Part of my like, yeah, exactly. Why is that? And have we reached out to folks that might be wanting
Do they
to
feel
work with
welcome?
us?
Is there a cost barrier? Okay. So is that what your health equity program was all about?
Yeah, that's definitely a piece of it. And now it's really grown to an amazing program, but there were kind of a lot of steps along the way. And yeah, I mean, part of it, even on the policy side, was talking about things beyond just psychedelics, right? Saying like, we need to hold space for all drug policy reform, and we can't say like psychedelics are the good drugs and these are the bad drugs, and like kind of have these separations, and understanding that disproportionately impacted folks who are already more marginalized. But then a big piece of what I was really involved with was we developed the first training for communities of color. And it was a beautiful, powerful experience. And really the idea was both to actively recruit amazing trauma therapists of color who were interested in this work, but also to revisit our training program and understand like ways that we could make it more culturally competent, and just build that in a way that also would support our ongoing research. So that was kind of the genesis of it. But from there, the health equity program, you know, we built out with our many more therapists that we were working with. It does involve many things, including over $1 million distributed for scholarships for therapists of color to attend like future trainings. There's also a lot revisiting how our recruitment process for our trials. And I'm actually really, really excited with the news we just announced 2 weeks ago that our last trial has 50% participants of color, which is
my God,
insanely.
Congratulations. Wow. That's very unique, isn't it? I don't think anybody else has done that.
Not to my knowledge. I'm like pretty confident not.
Yeah. Wow. Well done. Thank you so much. It's so important, right? Because we all have different biology. Like these clinical trials are setting the stage for how these medicines are going to get rolled out in the science and medical and legal community. And if we aren't taking everyone's biology into account, then we're not going to be rolling out these policies properly.
And I would even speak to actually the cultural aspect too.
That as well. Yes.
And having therapists that aren't re-traumatizing people with microaggressions. You know, unfortunately, a lot of therapists who are not engaged in work around understanding racism and other systems of oppression and just repeat these systems, and anything gets really magnified in an MDMA therapy experience. So
makes sense.
It's really essential to be, you know, to have therapists that are able to work with different populations. And so, yeah, that's one of the reasons it made such a big difference to recruit therapists of color and therapists who could work with different populations. And
wow. So was it 50% of the therapists are of color and the participants, or?
It was just the participants.
Participants, but you have a significant number.
We greatly increased the therapists.
Yeah.
Also did a lot of work to train the therapists to increase their cultural competence. And so there's just kind of a bigger context and prioritization. And yeah, there's other stuff, but I'll just say there's more information out there around our health equity program. You know, we hired a health equity officer. We've been really focused on prioritizing that work within MAPS. So I'm very proud of that.
You should be. I mean, it's really I'm sure you know you're very unusual. Like most young people in their 20s aren't like, I want to fight racial inequity and change drug policy and, go work for this organization that's promoting psychedelics. They're like, how's my hair? And I don't know, should I be on Tinder? I don't know. So
I'm curious how my hair is looking. Okay.
it looks great. But like I'm very inspired by how you obviously came in with, and even at a young age, reading about the Holocaust and just like wanting to make a difference and using your talents and your energy to make a difference. So thank you. Like Maps is really, really lucky that they've had you, and you guys have come so, so far. So now your title is Global Impact Officer. What a cool title. What is the global impact that you're hoping to make?
Hmm. That's a big question, but I will say that what I'm really thinking about now is on this like cultural societal level. Now that psychedelics are all trendy and more people are open to them,
Right.
what is
Yeah.
a responsible, ethical way of kind of introducing these substances and helping people integrate them into their lives? And in my work and policy, I would be lobbying in DC, and legislators would literally reference like a Law and Order episode about psychedelics, and I was like, no, like that's not even accurate.
Uh-huh.
That really
That
got
was
me.
the source. That was the biggest source of
Yeah,
information.
like instead of doing research, but I live in LA, and I was like, okay,
Right.
well, why don't I work with all these screenwriters and people who are
hmm
sharing stories with millions of people about how to tell stories that are more helpful? I love news media and I love research, but like most people are not reading newspapers and are not
No,
reading research.
no. They're reading about what Prince Harry wrote about, though, in his
That is
book.
true. Thank you, Terry. So that is like a helpful story. And
Yeah.
the more I kind of dug into stories and narrative building, the more I understood how formative they are for all of us, at every level of society. And, speaking of the root source of things, I kind of found like this was the root, like stories and culture really set this broader context. And, people, even if you're like doing substances in a place that is, criminalized, like that might play, that's like literally impacts your set and setting, like you're maybe paranoid or you're impacting that. So really understanding on every level how significant it is to understand what's happening. And also like psychedelics are very serious substances. I'm glad that a lot more folks are experimenting, and in California there's this term California sober because it's like so trendy to use mushrooms at a party instead of drinking.
Right.
It's wonderful, but I also really hope people are being intentional and understanding that you can take too much at a party and that can have a really difficult experience. Trauma can come up from your childhood, like all different things.
I resemble that comment.
I wasn't even implying that, but with MDMA, it's important to me also to take the opportunity to say it's very likely contaminated with many other substances.
Yeah.
Possibly even fentanyl. So how do people test their drugs? How are they like responsible about who they're using substances with? A lot of things that I feel like kind of get missed in the excitement over these things. But at the same time, when a lot of people in the psychedelic world are like only willing to talk about the research and the science, that's also a problem to me, because most people are accessing these not in a medical context.
Right.
That can be wonderful if they're doing it safely. So I guess I'm just really invested in how to create space for people to integrate these in all different ways that they want. And, that's part of also my calling with founding the Jewish Psychedelic Summit. I believe that we're in this time of like great spiritual awakening, and people are looking for spaces to ground their experiences in culture and ancestry and spirituality. And a lot of folks are kind of in our space kind of gravitate towards other cultures than their own that might have more obvious psychedelic histories. And there's places, times for that if you're able to approach that with respect. But I believe there's deeper work in really exploring your own context and how that can kind of intersect. And I believe that's a way of also helping more responsibly integrate these substances. You know, I'm Jewish, but I work with faith leaders of all different religions on how we can create space so it's not like someone who's Christian has a big experience and has to like reject how they grew up because now psychedelic. Like, no, like whatever, there's space for both in that. And I really believe that's just like helpful in the grounding. And yeah, and you said something earlier about me, like, oh, it's so cool that you like chose to do this work. But I have to say, I think there's something, it doesn't even feel like a choice on a certain level.
It chose you.
I believe like, you know, no one's free until we're all free. And like all of our safety is really connected. And like, also, again, as a Jewish person, there's like a lot of heightened stuff recently. Like, I just feel like that work is just part of like, I don't know, I really never got to quite like, I'm grateful that I was able to like listen to that calling.
Yeah.
Now I will call it intuition or whatever, but at the time I didn't really have a word for it. So I am very grateful that I had the safety and ability to be able to follow that crazy itch and me being like, what is this psychedelic thing? But yeah, I'm grateful that I do think it comes like from here more than like a choice from here. Because if I was choosing from here, I might have chosen a path that like paid me better.
Right. Yes. Those of us that are doing this work aren't generally doing it for the paycheck. But yes, I mean, thank goodness you heard the call and you followed it, because your work has already impacted so many people. And it's really, I mean, as long as MAPS has been on this journey already, it really is just the beginning, because now MDMA is going to be the first one to cross the finish line. So I'd love to hear some predictions from you on, you know, how do you see this thing rolling out? Because you mentioned a lot of different things like decriminalization or all compounds, not just psychedelics. And I mean, I know all of us are kind of wondering, how's this going to go down? Is it going to go compound by compound at a federal level? Is it going to keep changing at the state levels? Are we talking decriminalization, descheduling? So I'd love to hear your predictions. If you have.
For sure. I do both predict and hope simultaneously that they're going to have many aspects moving forward at the same time. So, you know, decriminalization is so essential just to stop arresting people, like point blank. Like, you know, that feels absolutely essential no matter what.
Yeah.
And I also deeply believe in developing that psychedelic therapy in a medical space. And it's actually been really sad for me to see what's happened with cannabis, where the like legalization and decrim kind of took over, and there's not really federally developed drugs in cannabis. There are a few, but they're like not really, they're like not smoking and different. They're not haven't been as robust as I would love to see. And there's a lot of people who would really benefit from better medical cannabis. And with psychedelics, there are a lot of things to consider about how to maximize the health outcome. So I believe we are going to continue seeing, you know, individual drugs moving through FDA process. So they're being made legal at the federal level for medicine, which is awesome. And it's really essential that while that's happening, we're also working to make sure people aren't going to jail while other people are getting to pay, you know, for that medicine. Moving much faster on a state level than a federal level, because even cannabis is like barely moving on the federal level that way. So that's a frustration, but I am encouraged to see a lot of progress on the state level. You know, Oregon decriminalized all substances. Colorado had a pretty expansive, interesting decrim bill recently. So I do see that moving, and we've seen it even on the city level. I also see both in Oregon and Colorado, different models for also trying to regulate and go beyond decrim, which I think is also essential, because decrim does create this kind of gray market space. And again, who suffers in that space? It's usually the more marginalized communities. Like, you know, even in Colorado, after they legalized cannabis, Black people were still way more likely to get arrested for cannabis for like smoking in the wrong place or something. So there's just a lot there. And I do believe that when things are legal and regulated, it makes it safer for people. It makes us, you know, we can ensure that MDMA isn't contaminated with fentanyl. We can know where we're sourcing these medicines and, you know, not doing damage in that process. I'm also really encouraged to see different cannabis state laws, like the recent New York law that was led by, Cassandra, this and DPA working on this, that really took into account equity and access, because certain states with cannabis that have legalized really only created limited industries that prioritized really folks with money and mostly white men. And people who had like an arrest record weren't even permitted in the industry, which, like people of color are far more likely to be arrested. So
right.
levels like that. So my hope is that if psychedelics can move forward in a regulated way that takes into that account, that would be really key. And I mean, yeah, I hope that we end this war on drugs. And I do believe, I really do predict that we are on that pathway there. But I think it will be interesting to see how we try to regulate different substances. And, something like heroin, people are like scared of, like, what, do you want to sell heroin at the corner store? But actually, like in Canada and Switzerland right now, doctors can prescribe heroin, which is actually a safer way of working with folks that are having, a relationship with that substance. So I do think, and now we have prescription opiates that have other issues. So there's just a lot of need to really examine best practices, I think, for different substances. But I do really hope that at least on the decrim level, we are continuing to look at broader decrim and not individual substance decrim, because that just continues to further stigmatize substances. And really the stigmas around substances are associated with the people who use them. And so it's just, causing more problems than helping. But I would, on a prediction level, guess that for the legalization and regulation, there will be kind of more siloed processes. Like we're seeing the psilocybin getting picked out of like, okay, we'll regulate that, but not the other, and just others, because the others are too hard to figure out right now. I was like, this is so important because we can regulate in the lab, but then they're like, what do you mean labs? That sounds scary, much grow. So I see that being more of an issue, but I'm hopeful that we can address that and work to change it.
Yeah. Wow. It's an amazing time. It's going to be so fascinating to see how this all goes. And I'm just really grateful that people like you and of course Rick Doblin and just everyone at MAPS are helping to steer a lot of these policies and discussions. So for all of the folks that are listening, how can they support your work? How can they follow along? And how can they find out more?
Hey, well, you can support MAPS. We are always fundraising, and even though you might see announcements that a lot of money is coming in, it's almost exclusively going to our drug development and MAPS.org that's doing the education, doing the policy, doing the health equity work. Really needs your support. So that would be one awesome way.
Okay, tax deductible, maps.org.
And you can follow us on all the socials. On Instagram, we're at MAPS News, but we have Twitter, Facebook. You can also follow me on Instagram at Natalie Lila, Lyla. I post a lot of different things across the spectrum.
Yeah, I love following your posts. You share really useful information.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm happy to stay in touch that way. I love to meet amazing community actually through, social media. There are plenty of huge issues with, but one of the most beautiful things to me is the community that you're able to connect with.
Yeah.
So that's pretty special. And what else? Jewish Psychedelic Summit. We also have an Instagram and a Facebook account. It's a really exciting, growing community.
And are you having an event? Is Jewish Psychedelic Summit like a group that people can join? Is there an event?
We had an event during the pandemic. It was a bit of we had over 1,000 people attend, which was really
amazing.
But we will be planning another event. We haven't announced.
Good. All right.
Following along on Instagram or joining the Jewish Entheogenic Facebook group is also cool. There's just like thousands of people talking about that. If that interests you. Also, like if you're interested in psychedelics and religion and spirituality in general, there's Legalize is a great group working with Christianity and psychedelics. And there's just more and more of that emerging. So I guess I would just encourage people who that resonates with to kind of look around and find the others and start community building, because I think it's really important that we have a lot more spiritual um, grounded spaces to help people like through their different journeys.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to have a whole other separate discussion just about psychedelics and spirituality and religion. It's such an important topic, and and breaking stigmas, and where some of these, traditions come from, and even the ancient texts, like some of the references, and it's a fascinating topic. So I'm definitely going to be connecting with you on that as well. My grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, so I didn't just grow up reading the books. I grew up hearing the actual stories, and so I feel you on that level as well. And I love what you said, is that like we're not free until we're all free. So I'm really moved by your heart and your dedication to this mission, and I'm on it with you, Natalie. I'm so grateful that you took the time to have this conversation with me, and I really encourage everyone out there who's listening to please support maps.org and Natalie and the whole team's incredibly important work as this new era, this new industry, this new way of, bringing healing to people is rolled out. We need to be considering the equity, the way that it's coming forward through not just the science, but also the culture and so many of the things that you're working on. So I'm a huge fan. Thank you again. And thank you all for listening. Thanks, Natalie. Take care.
Thank you.